First, I want to introduce my panel of experts. Professor of Education and Business at the University of Southern California, Dr. Shaun Harper. Co-facilitator at the Ally Conversation Toolkit Workshop, Allison Mahaley. Attorney and Social Justice Advisor, Natasha Scruggs. President of the National Association of Real Estate Brokers, Lydia Pope. And Director at the American Civil Liberties Union, Rashad Turner. Thank you all for being here. I really wanted to talk about where we are now versus where we were a couple of years ago. And Dr. Harper, you told my staff that centuries of systemic racism certainly won't be undone in a summer. We know that. But is progress being made?
Well, I think that one noteworthy indicator of progress is that there's now more national and global consciousness about anti-Blackness and about structural and systemic racism. But consciousness alone will not redress centuries of racial violence, negligence, and harm. We need policy change.
Do you think there is active voter suppression going on?
Well, I think, Dr. Phil, we do see examples of voter suppression happening around the country. The thing that I like to point out, though, with voter suppression is that it's never really an issue when things are going well for the Democrats. When the Democrats feel some type of pressure, or they feel like they're losing that Black vote that continuously gets them elected, then it becomes an issue. I will say that not being able to give people water or food as they're standing in line is as ridiculous as it sounds.
Yeah. And you say that's important because Black voters will stand in line all day long.
Absolutely.
If necessary. And if they can't go to the bathroom, they can't get a drink, they can't get some nourishment or whatever, then that cuts that line down.
Absolutely. Right. So I think we all want the opportunity to exercise that right to vote. But the question that always comes up in my community is, do we see those votes translate to Black lives actually improving?
Yeah. And Natasha, you say incarceration is the biggest barrier.
I say incarceration is the biggest barrier because there are 2.2 million people in America that are incarcerated. There are 7.8 million people on probation and parole. All of those people do not have the right to vote. Most people think that once they become formally incarcerated, the country calls them felons, I don't use that term, but most people think that formally incarcerated people cannot vote. And they're afraid to vote because they don't want to be penalized for that. So that means that we have almost 10 million Americans currently that cannot vote, and these are the most vulnerable.
A lot of critics say, Shaun, that this is not about suppressing the vote, it's about suppressing fraud. And there's been a lot of study about this. If somebody wants to actually dig down and look at non-traditional voting, like mail-in votes prior to voting prior to actual election day, that sort of thing. And I've actually done a deep dive on that. And I can't find one shred of evidence that suggests that that favors one party over the other or increases the level of fraud one whit. I can't find it from any independent evaluators, whether they're left, right, or center. So what are we talking about here?
We're talking about...
What's the fraud?
There is no fraud.
That's why I can't find the fraud.
I think that, there are these scare tactics, these boogeymen, if you will. And this is one of them that, Black people and other people of color are stealing votes and that dead people are voting and so on and so forth. When we look at the evidence across the states, oftentimes there are one or two or maybe a dozen cases out of millions of voters. This is just not a thing. This is about Georgia turning blue. It is about other states in the 2020 election that were flipped. So this is really about suppressing, the influence of Black voters, most especially Black women voters who turn out in historic numbers in these elections. It's about undoing the influence of Black voters.
Well, today is the last day of Black History Month, and we're discussing the societal inequalities between Black and white people in America and assessing whether there has been really any substantive change since the global protests that resulted from the deaths of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, and Ahmaud Arbery in 2020. Now, one area that my panel of experts all agree on are the reported racial disparities in real estate practices and income. When there is ownership in homes, it's not at the same level as far as the value of the home, the equity in the home. It's not the same, so building wealth is an uphill battle.
When the gap is getting wider, when you go from 44% to 43%, it doesn't look like Blacks are moving up, we're moving down. And it's because of all the different systematic racism that is in place today that has to change, and it has to stop, and it has to start from community, but it has to end on the top where they begin to make a change in America. The more that they continue to allow the challenges in the loan practicing, the loan level where Blacks are having higher interest rates. When Blacks, if you have a 720 credit score and you got $7,000 in the bank, you're still gonna have a worse loan than a white American that has the same amount. That is true. I've experienced it with my family member. And I took her to the bank and I made the bank make an adjustment on her loan product. And that exists today.
So people know with redlining, we're talking about discriminatory lending practice dating back to the 1930s, when lenders would draw red lines on maps around neighborhoods that were predominantly Black as a way to deny a mortgage, claiming it was high risk. I mean, it was just blatant. There's no other way to describe it, right?
Yeah, redlining is still there. Just because you don't see the red lines on the map doesn't mean it doesn't exist.
Yeah, it still exists. What do you want to say?
As a white person, I was actually explicitly told that if a Black person moved into our neighborhood, it would lower the value of our homes. And so these practices were put into place to cause white flight out of neighborhoods so that realtors could come in and buy the properties at lower prices and then flip them. I mean, this has been going on, but the thing is that this is about bias. This is about unconscious bias. And it is so, anti-Black bias is so predominant in our country, and no one wants to talk about that.
I've experienced a story of steering. When I bought my first house, I went to buy my first home. They took me into a neighborhood that I didn't ask. So when they did that, I didn't buy the property. Guess what I did? I decided to get my real estate license and run the National Black Organization to talk about the issues with steering and the importance of putting Black folks where you want them to go rather where they want to go.
Now, think about that. 50% more listings were shown to white buyers than Black buyers. And you said something interesting about getting into the law. You said, yeah, we do need Black lawyers, but we need people that understand the struggles. They don't just need to understand the law, they need to understand the struggles of the people functioning under the law. That's what really motivated you.
Absolutely. I believe that when you have that experience and when you have family members that are going through this, that are being discriminated against on every level, you can understand what's best on how to treat them. As far as real estate, appraisals are even discriminatory. A Black family will try to get an appraisal on their home, and they will have their white friend get it, and it'll be higher. So it all, like we said over and over and over, racial discrimination and racial bias is the biggest factor in all of this stuff. And so it's all just these biases, these paradigms that are not real, that if people could just question them and not just go along with it and say, why do I think this? Why do I think that this Black family deserves less? Why do I think that this Black neighborhood deserves less, this Black school deserves less, or this Black person accused of a crime deserves less?
The Black folks I know, and I know lots of them, Black people don't choose to be poor. We don't choose to go to underfunded schools. We don't choose to be in communities that lack resources and jobs. We don't choose to, live in communities where we have inequitable access to high quality healthcare. We don't choose to be in the lowest paid, least powerful roles in corporations and other places where we work. There are systems that, cyclically place us in those positions.
So let's
Absolutely.
be real. A Black community, we know that we have challenges with the schools. We know we have challenges even with the grocery stores that doesn't have healthy foods. We have challenges, not just all of those, but in the police force. We don't have enough in the community to assist us. So what do we do about it? What are the solutions? So again, it goes back to the partnerships of everyone, white, Black, Asian, Hispanic. You have to come into our community, feel what we feel, see what we see. I encourage you to spend a week in a Black community. Come back to my old neighborhood and see how you feel. Tell me what you get when you leave my neighborhood after that day, when you can't even walk to a store because there's a payday lender down the street, or you have to get food that is expired. So these are the things we have to bring education back, but we have to come together as NARAB and anyone to bring it all together.
Well, Keith is here now in the studio audience. So hello again, Keith.
Hey, buddy.
I want to thank you again for the amazing hospitality that you showed to me and my staff there. You've been watching all hour long. What's your takeaway from this discussion here? What do you think needs underlining more than anything else?
I mean, everybody made great points. Just from my experience, because I've lived both. I lived in the gang culture. Did 10 years in prison, and now me and my fiance are a homeowner in an affluent area, right? And I have a business. So I can speak from both sides. And it's not just about picking up your bootstrap, or like the young lady was saying, the exception being for everybody. Like, I can't expect the people that I grew up with to be where I'm at, because I had opportunity. Someone actually gave me an opportunity, right? Placed value on me, seen value in me. And I think that for the most part, from my experience, America just does not value Black. That's just from my experience, how I feel.
Yeah, and then you did say yesterday, when you were given that opportunity, you really seized it. And I asked you what your biggest obstacle was, and you said discipline.
Discipline.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, it's certainly a smooth running operation now. I can tell you, I certainly give it the thumbs up. I can tell you for sure, the food is great.
Thank you.
Today's topic is an important one. We went longer than our allotted time. You can see more of our conversation on drphil.com. I would really like to thank all of my guests here today. And one of the things I would really like to acknowledge is everybody being willing to have an open conversation about this and hear everybody else out. I think if everybody would have this approach, it would be not about winning an argument, but about solving a problem. And so I really applaud you guys for your approach to this. Do you have a story or a question for me? Click the link in the description and tell me what in the world is going on.